Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jeremy Brown. I run Canning House. Thank you very much for attending the event we've put on today. Let me say three things, just briefly by way of introduction. The first is that we at Canning House are trying to put a keener emphasis on our business, commercial trading ties between the United Kingdom and Latin America. And to that end, we are organising a whole series of roughly monthly business-orientated conferences. To this one today, but before Christmas, we have events on mining, an important sector between Britain and Latin America, agribusiness, and renewable energy as well. So there are constant sort of tick, tick, tick. And you're very welcome. We decided to lower the barriers to entry by making it free to attend. And please do register. Please keep coming. We're trying to put on events which we think are likely to be interesting for people. The demand is going up, and we're very pleased with that. And we wanted to put a particular emphasis today, but in a number of our events on finance, financial services. There's an obvious interest in Latin America about what London can do as a global financial centre. And I think London is forging a particularly impressive and distinctive role in this whole area of green finance, sustainable investment. So that's the subject of today's event, and you're very welcome. We're very pleased you're here. So we've got a great audience. We've got a stellar lineup of panelists. You've seen the sort of programme, and we've got two panels with a sort of so-called fireside chat in between, and we think we've put together a really good mix of people, and they will provide great insights for you. And we've also got some great guests here as well. Some of our corporate members, Prom Peru, Baker McKenzie, ERG International, Pogus Goodhead. We've got ambassadors from Latin America. Just talking to the Guatemalan ambassador. So I've got two Lord Mayors, former Lord Mayors, Charles and Vincent. Thank you for being here. So I won't make it like so complete This Is Your Life, but we've got a whole number of distinguished people, and we're very pleased that you're all here. And finally, before I pass on, we're delighted to be holding this event here at the London Stock Exchange, because it is a globally famous institution, brand even, if you like. It's obviously highly suited to our subject matter today, pioneering Latin America's sustainable finance, because Stock Exchange is carving out a well-known international profile in this particular field. But also I was told, and I dare anybody to challenge me on this, that the London Stock Exchange has a long history of financing businesses in Latin America. In fact, the longest continually listed company on London's markets is a Chilean company that was listed in 1888 to raise capitals for building railways. And if you know otherwise, don't speak up, because I reckon that sounds exactly the right note. 135 years of links to a Chilean railway company. But no, it's a great venue. We're delighted to be here. Thank you very much. It's prestigious for us to be here, but it's also it's good to put us right at the centre of the City of London and to set the right tone for our deliberations. So without further ado, I'll pass on for the second bit of introduction to Julia Hoggart, the CEO of the London Stock Exchange, and once she's delivered some words of welcome, then we'll get on with the programme. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. One of the benefits of this being my shop is I know where all the buttons are. So thank you for the introduction, and also to Canning House for your support, and also for being such a good ally and partner with us on this event today. A warm welcome to the Stock Exchange. Welcome all of you. Please enjoy being here. And take a look around, have a look at the screens. We are just closing. In fact, we closed 1 minute and 90 seconds ago. 1 minute and 30 seconds ago, 90 seconds ago. I think it feels to us entirely fitting that we're hosting an event like this. This has been the conference has been part of an initiative driven by our staff network, Latinos for Empowerment, Advancement and Development, LEAD, which is entirely fitting in the name, and indeed what they do around the organisation, and is part of our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month as well. And the aim of today's conference is to provide an opportunity to celebrate Hispanic culture and also to bring awareness and highlight opportunities for sustainable finance to further unlock Latin America's remarkable potential. Financing the green transition in Latin America is hugely important, that goes without saying, but not just for the region, but for the world. And it's essential for us to meet our climate change and net zero goals. But it also presents a huge opportunity for Latin America itself and for investors in the region. From investing in renewables, decarbonising supply chains, or protecting the natural environment, the scale of investment required and the opportunities that investments create are huge. And let me give you a taste of how seriously Latin America is taking this challenge. Green, social, sustainable and sustainability-linked bond market issuance is expected to reach $40 billion across Latin America this year alone. And while sustainable debt only represents 10% of total global issuance, Latin America accounts for nearly 30% of that market. But whilst research indicates that the region's commitment to meeting its UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 is unwavering, a huge amount remains to be done, and a great deal of financing will be required to get there. The London Stock Exchange has been supporting investors and issuers in the transition to a low-carbon and sustainable economy for over a decade, and we remain committed to continuing to do so for the decades to come. And that's why we offer the broadest range of sustainability markets and products and services of any global stock exchange, including our green economy mark for equity issuers and funds, our sustainable bond market, which has made us the capital raising destination of choice for many countries in Latin America, and our voluntary carbon market designation, particularly relevant for a region that's poised to become a global provider of voluntary carbon credits with the world's largest rainforest and 6 of the world's 17 mega-diverse countries. Our purpose is, as a group, after all, is to drive financial stability, empower economies, and enable customers to create sustainable growth. So this is at the core of what we do. It's at the core of who we are, and we feel that it's only right as a consequence that we have the opportunity to host events like this today, and we're very proud to be able to do so. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a thoroughly stimulating discussion. I know that there are some incredibly high quality panelists who are going to be talking to you today. Please make it interactive and engage. This is all about us moving the agenda forward and learning from one another. There is no value in only one of us ever getting to the top of this particular mountain that we have to scale in addressing climate change. We have to get there together. And the more we can learn from one another, the more we can share best practice, and the more we can share ideas and stimulate change amongst all of us, the quicker we will all get there together. So it feels really important to me that London can be a convener of exactly that conversation. I always say that our job as a stock exchange is to be a convener of capital. Our job is to bring together those who have capital with those who need capital in service of an objective. And I don't think there's one more important objective for our generation than the just transition to net zero. So we are hugely proud to have all of you here today. Thank you. Enjoy. Thank you again to all of our panelists who've come in to speak as well. Thank you to all of you for giving up your Friday afternoon for such an important subject. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Benjamin Beerworth, partner at Baker McKenzie, to moderate the first panel. So, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Beerworth. I'm a partner at Baker McKenzie in the corporate finance team, representing corporates and investment banks in a variety of debt financing transactions with a specialty in ESG and sustainable financing. It's my pleasure to be the moderator of this great panel this afternoon. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves in order. On my left is Elena Moratini.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Thanks.
Silvina.
Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I was going to go on with.
Yeah.
Shall I?
Yes.
I lead the sustainable business practice in Globant, which is a technology company of about 30,000 people. So we do use technology to basically empower and solve sustainability issues.
To her left, Silvina Brucia.
Hi, good afternoon all. My name is Silvina Brucia. I'm responsible for sustainable finance in emerging markets in the data and analytic part of London Stock Exchange Group. I was born in Argentina and worked more than 15 years in Latin America, in many countries, based in Mexico also. And since 2021, I moved to Dubai to take this role in emerging markets and trying to leverage all the experience and also connecting these emerging markets with the global ones, as today we are doing.
Dr. Sandra Guzman Luna.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Sandra Guzman. I'm the General Director of the Climate Finance Group for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a think tank that has been working for the last 10 years in trying to transform the financial sector to mainstream climate change in the operations. I'm originally from Mexico, but I'm based in the UK, and I'm very, very happy to be here.
And last but not least, Constance de Vavran.
I'm impressed by the name pronunciation. Thank you for having me. I'm Constance. I have the privilege of working for the Climate Bonds Initiative, an NGO, international NGO, dedicated to mobilizing the debt capital markets for climate solutions towards resilient low carbon economy. And we were founded in 2009 by someone wonderful called Sean Kidney. And he pioneered the first taxonomy, which is a classification of assets. We can talk about it a little bit later. We established standards for the market. We're here to support the growth of the green, social and sustainable bonds market and to protect its credibility as well.
Now, Constance, staying on you, back to basics. In a few words, as it can be quite a long topic, but what is ESG financing? Everyone's talking about green bonds, blue bonds, transition finance, and sustainability-linked debt financing and other instruments.
Yes, so it's such a nice evening. I thought we could skip the ESG part and jump to the labeled debt markets. And the reason why I want to do this is I have spent many, many years as part of fixed income investment teams trying to integrate environmental, social, and governance risk factors into investment processes. And each asset manager goes about it this way, depending on its DNA and its investment style and philosophy. And it's very confusing for the investor community. And this is why I joined Sean at the Climate Bonds Initiative, because he had been focusing on the use of proceeds market. So the labeled debt market is made up of green bonds, social bonds, sustainable bonds, which are crossover between the social and climate use of proceeds. And these bonds, essentially the issuers come to market calling themselves labeled debt issuers because they earmark the proceeds exactly to specific social and green projects, assets, and activities. And that is very clear cut. And we establish standards at the Climate Bonds Initiative so that we actually check the green bond framework of those issuers. We do an analysis of the use of proceeds and activities. And we, if they want extra credit, they can go through our certification scheme, which gives them even a higher level of credibility. What does that mean? A lower cost of borrowing for the issuer and lower volatility or risk for the investor. So it's a win-win for everybody. And in fact, we've evidenced some greenium, which is essentially that part where the issuer gets a lower cost of borrowing. So all of this we report on in our State of the Markets reports. You're welcome to visit, and we have a special edition for the Latin American and Caribbean markets. And yes, so this is what we do. Obviously, past the use of proceeds market, because we know we need to do more. We need to accelerate the pace and the scale at which we are greening those large institutional investment portfolios, pension funds, and the rest of them. We've also now expanded our standards to qualify for the transition assets, and comes into the room the sustainable linked bonds market, where there's actually a target, so a choice of KPI depending on the sector, target setting, and the issuer is committed to meet that target. If they do not, a step-up coupon applies, therefore his cost of borrowing augments. Whereas if they do meet that target, they can, potentially get a step down. So we're working on all this. We administer a bunch of data, which is very popular with asset managers, obviously, because index providers use our data. They populate all these indices, and asset managers then manage the money against those benchmarks. So it's a pre-screening of the investment opportunity set that we offer them.
And what do you see? You've touched on a few of the trends in the market and technology out there, but what do you see as the current state of affairs and certain recent transactions in ESG financing in Latin America?
In Latin America, so Julia mentioned $40 billion of issuance volume for just this year. So actually issuance, so the cumulative issuance in Latin America and Caribbean market has $54 billion in total. It peaked in 2021, and then unfortunately we had a challenging fixed income backdrop in 2022, where rates went up and issuers were looking to higher rates. So that has put a dent into our progression, which is unfortunate because obviously we need to up that the max. Now we're looking at, so it was 63 billion when it peaked. It dropped at 40 billion in 2021. It's 40 billion now. We're only in September, so we still have a little bit of leg to catch up with the levels of 2021, which would be great. Dominated by a lot of issuance from governments, so sovereign debt issuers in Latin America are very present, and that's really important because it shows leadership. Now, in terms of the framework, so the architecture of that market, you have Mexico and Colombia who have actually put work into creating taxonomies. So that's great. So that's part of the work that we do, because obviously we have history in that and we've influenced the EU taxonomy, quite a big deal. We've done work with China, but in Latin America, we also have all these other markets who are working on developing their own taxonomy. That's really important because a taxonomy enables the usability of sector criteria that is industry defined. So for each industry sector, each activity has a particular benchmark that issuers need to meet. And this is how we are able to determine whether a bond is taxonomy aligned or not. And that's in terms of the use of proceeds, where the capital is being allocated to.
Thank you. And Elena, what have you seen recently in the market? What are some of the trends and recent developments?
Many rapidly evolving, and let me just, can I derail 1 second?
Of course.
I'm the scientist in the room somehow. I'm a geologist by background, so it is very relaxing to see and hear those big numbers in respect to finance, and a finance that is actually funding non-financial key parameters. So on behalf of science and technology, having the support of those enormous numbers that we've heard, it's really something that makes us feel more relaxed in respect to our convincing power that has not always been there in respect to climate change, in respect to planet boundaries, etc. So everything that we're saying today, it's really a great support to technology, science, and of course, business related to that. So it is really promising, and it hasn't always been like that. So we know very well that Kofi Annan started in 2004 saying that who cares wins, basically putting the foundation of that finance that would have succeeded if only taking care of non-financial parameters. So this is just to say at the beginning that really being here, hearing those numbers, listening to Julia talking about we can only thrive together because the problem of climate disequilibrium is definitely too large at scale to be solved by anybody on its own. It's really a message for the finance industry, for the corporate in general, every type of industry. So it is really important that we do actually perform that working together, not only for calculating scope 3 and parameters that are shared among different industries, but in general as an attitude, a constructive attitude of working together towards better goals. Because our goals need to be every year more ambitious, and in that respect, I'm very happy to work in technology because technology is the accelerator that actually can favor that ambition and making it come true. So trends, we see, I have the chance of working in Latin America in person. I'm in Latin America since 2007 as a geologist coming out of the energy industry. And we've seen really trends changing. Naming, for example, TCFD, it was something absolutely unknown and a different and difficult acronym up to 6 years ago. And now everybody is taking on board the fact that you can be a TCFD supporter, also because it's for free. So you just enter the website and actually decide to be one of the supporters. And this is growing, and that makes risk management and opportunity management in respect to green assets way more usable and fruitful for everybody. So indeed, encouraging and trying to be somehow the seed of that cultural change through technology and through awareness is very important. So definitely TCFD picking a lot up. TNFD also, something that until maybe 12 months ago, nobody would really recognize as an important framework to report upon. And both those frameworks represents risk management, but also opportunity management. So, for example, for us as a technology company, we really have a great opportunity in trying to work with any type of industry to accelerate their goals, to basically define better and more ambitious goals. So definitely another trend. And in many cases, we look at Latin America as absolutely, I don't want to say nobody's land, but I mean, since the regulation is not as strict as it is in the UK and as it is in Europe, you can consider it as a more free region, free to pick up any of the trends that would be more useful for each one of the countries, right? But it is an enormous opportunity, that of following others' trends, because basically you do not have to repeat that path. So, for example, the European Union today is pushing for a twin transition, the transition between digitalization and sustainability. Well, Latin America can pick up that immediately without any constraints. So there is a big advantage in being somehow new in this respect. And the trend that we see as a technology company dealing with many clients that do want to perform and advance in sustainability and in green assets metrics go from basically the blockchaining and somehow guaranteeing aspects of green assets. So everything that is monitoring and basically controlling green assets through any type of technology is one of the tendency, all the way to uncorruptible data through carbon credits. So the monitoring of green assets as a value, all the way to the definition of carbon credits. Carbon credits, or today cooling credits, another trend that is very quickly picking up. So TCFD, TNFD, carbon credits, management of green assets through any type of technology that we can. Drones have done a tremendous job in basically assessing the quality of our green assets with real-time data and platforms that can actually gather all those data and have them in a final output, whichever framework of reporting we want to use. And the other very, very important trend is impact. So creating a platform that can actually manage impact for any type of ESG and sustainable assets is another one of the big trends that it's very much performed and valued by non-commercial banks at the moment. So a lot of our time is devoted to the creation of those platforms that can actually manage impact, because we all feel that we need very concrete parameters and indicators to be able to say if in reality those ESG or sustainable assets are actually being successful.
Thank you. Now, Silvina, Elena's touched on some of the learnings that we can get from maybe developed markets or other emerging markets around the world. How does Latin America compare to other sustainable financing markets, and maybe what are some things that we could take to improve market development or that are leading in the right direction that could be helpful?
Sure. I could start to say that the challenge on financing in emerging market is huge. It's all the sustainability debt, including what Constance explained very well in terms of the different types, only capture 15% emerging markets of the total issuers. So there is a lot of work to do to achieve these 3 trillions of financing into the transition. When we compare the different emerging markets regions, there are similarities, and probably the similarities are more on the challenges in terms of taxonomies, disclosure, all the efforts that you mentioned before, but it's still a lot of work to do in terms of data transparency, disclosure, adoption of global standards, and also the balance between the global same language to attract financial investment, but also the uniqueness of each market is very relevant. So this balance is a challenge all across emerging markets. The lack of international rating, and this is very linked from the first one, could be another challenge across. And the third one probably I can mention is the development of especially in the fixed income space, the local markets. So today we are talking more about the connection between the Latin America and the global markets, but it is also a challenge, the depth of the local markets in emerging markets, that it's like delaying a bit the growth of the sustainability debt in general, in my opinion. But there is, when we are seeing the global picture of emerging markets, there are also a lot of differences. One is in the speed of adoption. So there are countries or regions that are started many years ago, and now there are others that started in the recent 2 or 3 years, and we are seeing that they are catching up very fast. We are seeing also the focus from government and regulators in the different Ps. For example, China, which is one of the biggest bond issuers in general, the green bonds issuers, it's all about incentive from government and regulators in terms of finance the transition. So it's a very focus on the at this point. And on the other side, we are seeing regions like Middle East or North Africa that are the ones that, as I said, are catching up in a sense in terms of product delivery, financing, and other. There are other interesting cases, probably in South Asia, like Indonesia, that have unique instruments, more creative. This is a result that we are seeing the same trend in the Middle East, is the synergy between Islamic finance and sustainable finance, which, in my opinion, this real synergy and this boosts a lot what's happening in those regions, because there are some principles that are alike between both universe, and there are other differences, but it's on the long-term prosperity is in the idea from the Islamic finance since the very beginning. So in the Middle East or in Indonesia, as I mentioned, there are green sukuks, which is like a fixed income instrument, but very linked to the budget of the government. No? It's called climate budget target. And Indonesia was the first one that issued this type of fund in 2018. And since then, it's growing a lot. And what is very important to connect this with the national objectives and the national budget is that allows all the transparency and clarity on the objectives of the bond and the tracking. So it's a lot of de-risking in the equation of the issuance. So there are good practices to adapt to Latin America, and also there are very innovative products that we share practices with other regions.
Well, it's interesting, and it's also a sort of lead by example. We were talking about governments and sovereign debt representing a large proportion of the sustainable finance effort in Latin America, and it's nice to see governments here represented as well. But it's sort of lead by example, and then the corporates and other institutions within those countries then follow suit. And then obviously the countries follow with regulation and taxonomy. Which brings me to the next question for Sandra. What do you see as some of the challenges in Latin America in terms of implementing ESG frameworks in an effective way?
Thank you so much, Ben. And please allow me to start with a positive thought as well. Definitely, we can say that there has been a change. I have been in this process related to climate finance for the last 18 years. And if we go back like 18 years ago, definitely bringing the financial sector to the climate conversation, to the sustainability conversation was like a no-no. It was, do you want to talk about climate change? Go with the environmental ministry. That's it. And definitely there is an engagement in the recent years, particularly in the last 10 years. It hasn't been as fast as we want. We see more participation, and there is only one reason why. And this is because the different sectors, the financial sector, and all the different institutions recognize that climate change is a risk, and climate change is here and is forever. There is a final conversation in recent, or like it's a clear conversation that we, this generation, we will face the impacts of climate change. Our investments will have an impact, and therefore the financial institutions have to adapt in mainstream climate change, because it's not possible to plan without thinking that something will happen, because it's already happening around the world. So that is obviously creating an environment. To what extent this is actually changing radically the processes and the ways that we are acting, producing, there is a massive gap. And that's where I would like to emphasize three critical challenges. And I'm sure there are a lot of factors here that can help a lot to deal with this. So the very first point is the real change in polluting sectors. So we are talking about, for instance, in sectors like mining or fossil fuel sectors, like, okay, let's reduce emissions, let's be more efficient, let's try to carbon capture and storage, let's do this and that. To what extent that is going to help us to mobilize and to rapidly change the behavior of the sectors? Yes, we can decarbonize some sectors, but we will need new sectors, new ways to generate revenue, new ways to generate jobs. Because let me share a number. We developed a sustainable finance index that we have been implementing in Latin American countries, normally to the 20 major emitters in Latin America. If we put together these 20 major emitters in Latin America, all together have the high carbon income that they receive is 10 times higher than sustainable income coming from the GCF or the adaptation fund. So the money that they are receiving is mainly for carbon intensive activities, and they rely on fossil fuels to generate revenue. And this is one element, how we are going to decouple our economies in a deeper way to really, really start talking about transformation. So the very first point is how we are going to really decarbonize processes, and what's the participation in the financial sector to do that. And this is not only about mainstreaming or implementing ESG, but it's also about transforming, like, structurally the way that institutions, companies, and the industries work. The second point is more about how we are going to really embrace the ESG concept, because yeah, there is a lot of progress in the environmental side. For instance, the reduction of emissions. A lot of companies are already measuring waste and all different processes related to environment. But the social side is still very not incorporated in many different countries, and of course in the companies is also a challenge. You know that in Latin America, the participation of communities, particularly local communities, indigenous communities, is such an important part when we talk about the understanding about well-being at the national level. And companies are still not talking with local communities, are not still talking with indigenous communities. And this is a big issue when we come with ESG. Are we really want to transform, or are we just greenwashing? And this is precisely one of the elements that is a big challenge in Latin America, because yes, we see more companies adopting the TCFD, more companies adopting now the nature disclosure information. And there are several new standards that are there. Obviously, harmonization is going to be a critical challenge, but it's also about regulation. How can we ensure that these companies are deeply embracing the full understanding of what ESG is? How we are going to set like incentives and regulations at the national level to ensure that there is a common floor for everyone. Otherwise, some companies will adopt, it's going to be voluntary, so some are going to do it, some are not, and that will create also disadvantages for the companies. So it's how we are going to regulate and create incentives to make this more like harmonic, like not only in certain groups, but actually ensure that this happens at all different levels. And my final point related to challenges is precisely information. For instance, at the governmental level, there are countries that are improving their reporting in terms of how much are they investing on, for instance, fossil fuels, on climate change, or different activities. But there are not necessarily harmonic systems to report this information. Many companies at the private sector, they don't necessarily share this information, and there is a massive gap in understanding which sectors are really investing, to what extent their investments are actually climate compatible or not. So there is still a massive gap in terms of information, and we need information if we really want to take better decisions. So definitely, it is important to say, yeah, there is a good trend. Yes, there are more actors participating, yes, but we need to set rules. We need to set more like a really ambitious and robust regulation to accelerate this change in the behavior. Otherwise, we're going to take another 10, 20 years to change. And the real thing is that we don't have really time to do that. I don't know if you have been following in New York the Climate Ambition conference that was hosted by General Secretary Antonio Guterres. And the real story is that the commitments, even those in the NDCs, in the national determined contributions to tackle climate change, that are not ambitious enough because they are taking us beyond the 1.5 degrees. According to science, we are in the trend to go for more than 1.8, and probably with this trend, we will be more than 3 degrees Celsius in no more than 15 years. So there is something that, yeah, things are happening, perfect, but there are a lot of things that need to happen and faster if we really be transformative and not only talk about like the good news, but also the challenges that we are facing, because those are the ones that we have to tackle if we really want to be transformative.
And how do you see the coming months or years to tackle some of these issues, this intrinsic systemic issues?
Yeah, I definitely think that one of the elements that will be very, very important is this process about harmonization. For instance, there are a lot of standards happening, and a lot of companies at different levels are very keen to report to TCFD or keen to report to this other. And to be honest, those smaller companies are struggling, no? Like which one I'm going to apply, how we are going to develop like capacities to report or to adopt like ESG standards, because that also requires investments at the corporation level. So I think there is a huge opportunity to work more in the harmonization. It's something that there is a conversation, obviously globally, but also in Latin America about how to make this easier, no, for the participants. But the second point is also about how to create more like synergies, no, synergies between what this financial sector and these companies that are embracing ESG, how they are actually participating in the compliance of national goals, for instance, no? Like the national determined contributions are goals that are set by governments, but to what extent are they including the private sector, no, or the financial sector in the design? That's something that is not really there, and there is a huge opportunity to really work together to make these NDCs more ambitious, and of course to ensure an implementation path, no, because governments are putting in the table these NDCs, but not necessarily with an implementation strategy. And there's where the financial sector comes now, with all these, the climate bonds, all these emission of sustainable bonds, like my colleague was mentioning the case of Mexico. And it's true, Mexico is doing a really good job in creating these, emitting these bonds. But the real story is also that the country is investing a lot in fossil fuels as well. So it's how our economies will really increase financial flows, but also decrease carbon intensive flows. It's the only way that we are going to see like a real transformation, as the Paris Agreement is calling us and inviting us in the Article 2.1c, no? Like make financial flows consistent with a low carbon and resilient pathway. And we cannot do that if the carbon intensive flows are still growing and growing, but only investing a bit. Just to give you another number, in these 20-meter countries in Latin America, if you put together their public expenditure, they invest 39 times more in fossil fuels production than in sustainable matters or climate action. So there is a clear problem in terms of how we are going to decarbonize our economies and use all these standards, ESG, and all these to really make a transformational approach.
And Elena, we talked a bit about innovation and the role of technology in some of this transition and tackling some of these systemic issues. What is your view? We've talked about some of the challenges and solutions.
Yeah, I was trying to follow closely the previous answer. And in general, of course, we all agree. Time is the only commodity we don't have, so we really need to speed it up, and I think that technology is one of the tools to speed it up. At the same time, knowledge is definitely one of the tools to speed up everything we need to do in terms of decarbonization and sustainable paths and sustainable goals. I think that from a practical standpoint, decarbonization paths for the majority of the industry, especially the ones that are carbon intensive, are already there. So we know what we have to do. An energy company today knows what they have to do. A cement factory knows what they have to do. It's a matter of implementing, of course, it's a matter of having the finances supporting that. It's not anymore a matter of really tracing that roadmap. Roadmap is there. Roadmaps are there. We need a push to implement them, but really we're seeing very big leap jumps in respect to understanding and being aware of what we need to do. So I think that in the past 2 years, this rhythm has been really picking up, and maybe I'm too optimistic, but in transitioning times, it's not easy to find the way. So you really need to make sure that indeed financial institutions, banks are cooperating with in between public and private sector to bring along the funds so that those paths are actually performed, triggered, sponsored in respect to the technology that we need to implement so that we can accelerate it. So I think that there is a lot of work that has already been done. I think that there are some paradigms around that need to be somehow broken up. One of them being, for example, life cycle assessment. We need to use technology to understand the impact of value chains and supply chains end to end. Because, for example, of course, we know that we have legacy energy like the oil and gas. I'm not sure that we all know that we can actually decarbonize natural gas way more than we think in terms of numbers. It's a matter of investment. So in the end, it's always a matter of investments, and it's a matter of revenue. So it's very costly to do that. At the same time, I'm not really sure that we know what is the end-to-end impact of any photovoltaic decision that we take, so to say, in a broader term, because the calculations of a life cycle assessment end to end, from the moment in which we extract the lithium all the way to when we actually dispose the last solar panels, those calculations are still missing. So we really need to accelerate those numbers to understand the impact and be able to compare and take the right decision. But I think that many of those roadmaps are already there, so we can accelerate them through technology, calculations, digital twins, simulations, blockchaining to guarantee the anchorability of the data that we have. But in general terms, it's possibly knowledge that can actually push that change, because many of the tools are already there. And one thing which I think is particularly important, in the G20 of Argentina 2018, we started saying that it's not anymore 2 to tango, it's actually 3 to tango, because we have public, private, and civil society. And civil society today is really pushing markets towards a more ethical behavior. So I see it in a sort of more optimistic way, where I think that the market is actually choosing for specific, more sustainable trends. They may be more expensive. We know it all. I mean, it's not, it's no news, but the behavioral economics behind a more sustainable market and decisions, it's really making a lot of advancement, and lots of businesses that will not embrace that completely will be stranded very soon. So indeed, there's still a gap. I totally agree that there is the gap is big, but all the intentions, the seeds, the roadmaps, the ideas, the knowledge are already in place. We just need to push it through technology, through finance, through possibly also advocating, because as I said before, there are lots of paradigms that we really need to break. And also communication plays a big role in this, because I'm sure that everybody hears this lemma of there is no planet B. Well, actually, in our solar system, there is planet B, C, D. I mean, there's 7 of them together with the sun, right? And the point is that there is no planet B for us, because the planet itself has been through higher value of temperature, higher value of CO2 concentration. The point is that those are not livable conditions for us. So what I mean by that is that we really need to be very careful when we transmit messages and when we say things, especially the ones based on science. We really need to make sure that we are having a thorough way of communicating things. And again, I go back to renewables. I mean, renewables really need to be assessed. And I'm not saying that they're not the best choice. They may be the best choice, but I want to know why they're the best choice. I need to have the numbers of their impact on E, S, and G in respect to everything that we're talking about. Without those numbers, there is a lot of talking around this, and we may not come to the solution of the problem. And one last thing, of course, in Latin America, it may be a bit more difficult because we do not have a supranational body like we do have in the European Union, good or bad, but it's actually driving decisions in a more coherent way. We've seen what happened in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act. Everything changed. Everything in respect to climate tech and energy tech has dramatically changed in a year and a half. I mean, that is the amount of money of the Marshall Plan. It's really huge. So, I mean, it's big. Opportunities are there. We need to push towards the right direction, knowing the numbers and making really sure that we communicate things in the right way so that we can actually indicate to industries and governments a path to follow.
So we've already gone to yellow card. We're going to get a red card in a second.
Okay, sorry.
But I do want to get through the S and the G of ESG. Silvina, again, before we get the red card, in a few words, help us understand the connection between them and the other 2 letters of the acronym.
Yeah, I will try to be very concise. But I think that there is no way to see the E in isolated mode. They are all connected. Once I heard, and I always use since then, this phrase like, the E is the what, no, and the S is the why. why you are doing all the investment in the E is because of the impact in the society. And the G is the how, is having the correct frameworks, decision-making, structure, transparency to implement. So there is no way to have this disconnected. And in the particular case of Latin America, it's my first project with the Investment Development Bank many years ago when I was there was creating the Index America, which is considered E, S, G, and D development. Mm-hmm. And they change we help with the data, but they add a lot of metrics and concepts on development. And the ranking of companies in Latin America was with the great impact of these companies into the development of the infrastructure or whatever happens there. So for me, there is a lot of talk about the E, but it's always connected, especially the S, especially you talk about the different cultures and people that need to be involved, and the financial inclusion is a challenge also.
Thank you. And Constance, changing a bit, but very closely related, and we've talked about some of the other stakeholders who are involved, but what's the role of NGOs, development financing institutions in Latin America and the ESG finance?
Yeah, you've put them in a big bag all together, but anyway, NGOs / civil society, let's say, for us at least, promoting the growth, super important because we've thrown numbers, but $154 billion out in issuance out of Latin America and the Caribbean region is actually only 4% of the GSS Plus market labeled debt. And that is only a tiny portion. So we've just hit $4.2 trillion in June this year. The outstanding global debt is 140 trillion. So we're only scratching the surface. And Antonio Guterres, it's been established by the UN that we need to get back on track to that 1.5 degrees Celsius of limiting global warming. We need to get back on track to a $5 to $7 trillion annually. So even the IRA, if you think about it, Elena, it's like 340 billion. Which is a sea change. I appreciate, in green tech, but at the end of the day, it's not enough. It's not enough. So we are, as an NGO, in my role, I'm engaging with stakeholders across the food chain, from the government, corporate issuers through the investment banks. We try to hit as many issuers by working with the debt capital markets desk and corporate advisory teams, because we're more likely to disseminate our standards faster through them. So in cooperation with these teams, then we work with the asset managers so that they understand what they're taking on when they're absorbing all that demand. And, most issuance is very well subscribed, 3 to 4 times. And I mentioned the green yam earlier, so very good pricing of this debt. And asset owners, and this is the biggest, disappointment, is that we're really trying to get asset owners to move faster. And that's been a huge challenge. We really do need those large state-funded pension funds to get on board, but also the private sector, corporate pension funds as well, and insurance companies, and everybody to get on board with this program. In terms of market infrastructure, we also work, with LSEG in order to, and we did an event with BIVA, the Mexican stock exchange, not very long ago, in order to catalyze, that capital flow for Latin America. We have asset managers who manage against the JP Morgan EM Global Diversified Index. They have green indices who essentially have a European database very interested in investing in Latin American corporate and government bond issuance. So there is demand from investors. There's a lot of potential out on the ground in terms of the resources that Latin America has to offer. You mentioned lithium, there's copper. It's also one of the sunniest and windiest regions in the world. So there's a lot to offer in terms of adaptation and transition. So that's for the volume that we need. In terms of protecting the credibility, we've talked about harmonization of, interoperability, of taxonomies over the world. That's super important, but also all the standards of disclosures, TCFD, TNFD, etc. That's very important. So we're there to uphold the standards as high as possible. And then one thing that, I discussed with our head of Latin America, he really wanted me to mention the policy aspect, that including emerging markets as part of the global policy is super important. Those countries are those that are the most affected, and yet they're not often consulted in efforts for blended finance. You mentioned DFIs and multilateral development banks. You need to be part of that blended finance proposition and including them in the just energy transition. And it's a very good sign that we're seeing sustainability, so the blend of green and social bond issuance dominating the issuance in Latin America, because it means that issuers are really enjoying having the choice of use of proceeds across green and social. When we mean social, we have 8 categories or so for our social and sustainability taxonomy, and there is no taxonomy as such for social bonds. We still rely on the UN SDGs. But this could change. I read that a French investor had started looking into this, including Mirova, one of our partners, and looking at health infrastructure, education, empowerment, food security. So when we talk about housing, it needs to be affordable and sustainable. So the blending of those elements can help us make the transition more resilient, hopefully, i.e. make us less vulnerable whenever the next natural disaster hits us, essentially.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. I think we've done the hook a couple of times. With apologies, I don't think we're going to be able to take any questions, but I am going to introduce our next speakers for the fireside chat with Jane Goodland, Head of Sustainability, the London Stock Exchange Group, in conversation with Dr. Harold Hayboom, Deputy Director of the Center for Sustainable Finance, SOAS. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Harold Hayboom, Deputy Director, Center for Sustainable Finance at SOAS, University of London, joined by Jane Goodland. We've already heard, the Head of Sustainability at LSEG since 2021. And before that, the Global Head of Sustainable Responsible Investing at Willis Towers Watson. Thank you very much. I wanted to start our conversation with a sort of a broader question, contextualize our discussion and really discussion here this evening. We often hear London referred to as a world-leading, maybe even the world-leading net zero financial center, as a leader in greening capital markets, transition planning, all those things. In what way do you see this leadership role influencing and shaping the relationship with Latin America, not just for Latin American partners to raise capital, but also to really leverage that expertise and leadership to help with the transition there?
Thanks. So I think whenever I think about the sustainability challenge that we've got in front of us, which is like the biggest one ever, it's a global problem, right? So this shouldn't be about individual countries or regions kind of coming up against you. The quicker we can get to this kind of point where we understand that we're all part of a bigger system and that we all are ultimately reliant on one another to achieve a better outcome, the sooner we can get to that realisation and sort of agree, the better, right? And so this shouldn't ever, in my view, be a case of, you know, any particular financial centre being the, you know, the all-knowing kind of centre. I mean, the notion of that is just, you know, we may have some experience and we may have done a few things over a few years. That certainly doesn't mean that we've got the answers. Far from it. I think that it's about making sure that what knowledge and information there is available, that's shared, and that we make sure that that's shared to the extent that it can be tailored and adapted for different kind of regions. And so I think I heard the sustainable bond market being mentioned. You know, we've got issuers from 37 countries. So, you know, it's really about making sure that international financial centres such as London are a channel to kind of get access to capital from deep kind of pools of capital around the world.
One of the blockages that we've heard about before and that we often talk about in the system is often this lack of information, of disclosure. We know how important it is for decisions on capital allocation. Where do you see recent progress being made, perhaps also with regards to ISSB standards for informing this discussion?
I think it's absolutely right to call out information. And if you think about the way I kind of very, very basic think about it in terms of thinking about flows of capital one way, information the other way. And it's this virtuous circle of kind of those who are either providing capital, be it debt or equity, or they're providing insurance cover, short-term loans, whatever, right? But that has to be informed by information and data to be able to make sensible decisions. And that becomes even more important so the longer that kind of financial relationship is. So information is really important, but we know that we're missing a lot of information. One of our businesses, FTSE Russell, did a piece of work, I can't remember, last year or something, and it found like something like 42% of the FTSE all world weren't even disclosing kind of basic scope 1 and 2 emissions. And so I think, you know, it's really important to very quickly get to this kind of baseline of disclosure so that companies, you know, that's just part and parcel of kind of making those financial decisions. And not least, it's not just about kind of getting access to capital. Companies should be understand that information just to manage their own businesses, let alone the financial dimension of it. So information is crucial. I think consistency of information is paramount, because if you're, let's say, if you're in the equity market and you're running a global portfolio, it's sort of pointless to have companies in your portfolio in one region disclosing X, Y, and Z, and in another region, you know, ABC. The two are not comparable bits of information. So portfolio managers need to be able to allocate capital on the basis of common information, and that's why, you know, the development of the ISSB and this standards which were launched in June here, in fact, in this room, is so important, because actually that's the first time that we've kind of nudged towards a potential for global consistency. And so one of the things that we're super keen on and we keep on kind of advocating for, is the polite term, is for jurisdictions around the world to adopt ISSB with minimal adaptation and do it quickly by 2025. Because then and only then can we start to see the information flowing in a consistent way, comparable way. And it just means that decisions are kind of properly made.
So yes, we need information, but of course then we need to act on that information and information that's been disclosed. I suppose there's not really a shortage of capital, but often risks in investment are poorly understood or not really addressed effectively. Perhaps I'd like to ask if you could speak a little bit to the need to use public money, multilateral development banks, national development banks, philanthropic capital to de-risk investments and really crowd in private capital to change this whole debate and dynamic and mobilize the kind of private capital investment that's needed to transition effectively.
look, I think the role of blended finance is important, and we've seen that particularly in certain markets that private investors perhaps are not super keen to go to, right? Or feel that the risk is too great. So I think it is important that we see this kind of patchwork of kind of finance. I think that's super important as well. If you think about from a systems perspective, that in order to pull off what we've got to pull off collectively, you need governments, private sector money, public sector money, companies, societies, NGOs, everyone has to be involved. And so that's no different when you think about where the money's going to come from. So I think there is a huge role of blended finance, and I think we just need to figure that out, right? We just need to figure that out quickly, because, and that's particularly the case in certain areas of the world where perhaps the kind of the availability of funding is a bit more constrained.
Do we need to have a better sense of understanding and seeing how financial markets and the real economy cooperate and mobilizing some of this capital? What do you see as some of the challenges or the need to really get on top of that more?
So one of the things I think that has happened, and it was mentioned in the previous panel, is that the role of financial markets and finance in transition, they were kind of late to the party a bit, you know, in a big sense. You know, I've been working in sustainable and responsible investment for 25 plus years, right? So there's always been a bit of activity, but to the extent that it's required, it's been quite a recent kind of phenomena that sort of says, oh, actually, you know, financial markets need to be really involved in this transition. And so I think the enormity has only it's sort of only in recent times that's kind of become clear. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting is this development around saying, well, yes, we need information. Of course, we need information. Everyone's on board with that pretty much. And we need to allocate a bunch of capital to be able to fund the transition. Yeah, got that. But actually, I think one of the things that is going to be released this year is guidance around transition plans. And that's when it gets interesting, because that's when not only does a company say, we want to reduce our emissions, or we want to kind of use more renewable energy or something, but the transition plan is the articulation of how they're going to achieve it. And then and only then do you get to the point of how you're going to achieve it and how much is it going to cost. And then you can start having a sensible conversation as a company with your providers of capital. And then there can be a sensible view about, well, how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And so that's why transition plans are really, really important, because actually it requires companies to have a much more granular view about how they're going to achieve these targets. And it's quite interesting, I think, in terms of, I think lots of companies and leaders of companies have come from a place where, you know, if you told them you're going to put a target out publicly and it's quite punchy, and you're going to put your name to this target, but you've got no idea how you're going to achieve it, and you've got no idea how much it's going to cost, and you know the confidence levels of you actually achieving it are pretty low. Many CEOs would say, you're crazy, I would never do that. But yet we've seen it. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of companies stake their claim and make it so something strange is going on, right? Something quite odd is going on. If you look back in time about kind of organizational theory and leadership, something quite odd has happened, quite extraordinary in fact. But that's where transition plans now need to come in, because they need to do it's been a bit back to front actually, but so the targets are out there and now we need the plan. And that's when I think the financial markets need to work with companies, and indeed that's happening through the likes of GFANs and also the UK framework, which will be launched in October, again here, luckily. So that will be starting to set some guidance around what should be in a transition plan, what should people be trying to build into that. And that helps obviously investors as well to sort of set expectations around what information they're likely to see.
So you can put the horse back in front of the cart.
Well, yes, it's gone all a bit back to front, hasn't it?
Yeah. I will take one more question and then open it up to questions from the audience. So get ready with the questions you have for Jane. My last question is around those businesses that are more carbon intensive. energy intensive segments of the market. Can you shed a little bit more light on the way LSEG sees the relationship with those businesses? We heard earlier about, yes, we need to invest in low carbon sectors and build those up, but we also need to address the legacy industries and some of those other businesses, and they need capital to transition effectively.
Yeah. So if I just take you back to our sustainability strategy, because it will help to explain our view on this. So we've identified kind of three key things that we believe are areas that we can, as an organisation, really help on the sustainability side of things. And the first is obviously helping to accelerate the transition to net zero. So that's really about decarbonisation of the economy as it stands now. And there's a whole bunch of things that we can do in terms of provision of capital, data, information, etc. But the second area is around the growth of the green economy. And so this is really about sort of saying, well, at the same time as decarbonisation is happening, we need to be investing and kind of really fueling that kind of solution side of the market, because it's not good enough just to do the first one. Because we know actually we need this kind of whole new green economy to flourish and to really kind of seize the moment. And then the third area, which is echoing a bit about the previous panel, is the fact that there's no point in doing any of this at all unless actually we have inclusive economies where individuals, communities, people can share in the benefit of economic progress and development. Because there's no point having an environmentally sustainable world actually if wealth is not shared to the benefit of individuals. So we've got these three pillars of our strategy, and so that's kind of where we see things, and the green economy is a really important part of that. I can't really remember your question. What was the starting point? I have a habit of doing that, so I'll go on.
It was all about bringing some of the carbon-intensive industries and businesses along for the ride, and transition capital that is needed.
Absolutely. So one of the things I was going to say is that in this kind of situation, it might be tempting for investors or banks or whoever else to look at their portfolios and see all the emissions that they're financing and think, well, a quick way to reduce the emissions that are on my book is just to exit some of these stocks or relationships. And at LSEG, we think that's kind of sort of misses the point, because actually, guess what? Those emissions still exist. They might not be on your book, but they're out there. And so it's really important, we think, to say, look, the reality is that we need to work together with these hard to abate or heavy emitting sectors, because there's no point kind of leaving those to get on themselves. So I think staying invested and working with those sectors is really important. And that's, again, transition plans come into it, because the more we can sit down and talk with those companies and work out what a sensible transition plan is, the better. And then then you can come up with a sensible solution about what's needed to make that transition. So I think for us, it's about kind of holding hands with those firms and gently encouraging as well. And, investors have got a huge role to play in that. Absolutely. Asset owners was mentioned a moment ago. Really important that asset owners are very clear about what their assets should be doing.
Sometimes more than maybe just nudging gently.
Yeah, big old push, probably, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for this first bit. I'd like to open up to questions in the audience.
One back there?
Yes, I can see a hand up towards the back. Sorry.
Sorry, that's your job to do that.
It's actually mine.
I just saw it out the back of my head.
No, I think difficulty spotting who's got their hand up.
Jane, thanks for your remarks. I'm Luis Oganes from JP Morgan. I'd like to check if you have an opinion. A lot of the money, most of the money from the private sector that is being mobilized for decarbonization, for the transition, is going into mitigation, meaning trying to reduce, greenhouse gas emissions. Very little, if probably none, is going into adaptation. And we're all horrified watching the news every month, every week almost these days, of natural disasters, climate change related, happening all over the place. and the private sector is not involved in adaptation solutions. What do you think needs to change? What is failing there? Thanks.
It's a really good question, and you're right. I mean, I think if you look at the amount of effort that's going in, quite rightly, to reducing emissions and bringing those down, but we know that despite the efforts going on, that we're still going to see some pretty kind of poor outcomes, and adaptation is critical. What needs to change? I mean, I hate to say it, but probably more of the same that we've seen in recent times around kind of natural disasters. It's awful to say it, but the truth is, I think the evidence that we're seeing around us, I think, has been a bit of a wake-up call, actually. And the more that this is not somewhere else on the planet and it's very kind of, close to home, I think that sort of helps to sort of focus minds about kind of how investment, maybe at the national level, needs to go into adaptation. Countries should be thinking about how they are going to adapt and how they're going to live in a world which, frankly, is going to be very different. And, actually, companies are doing that too through scenario planning, through TCFD, etc. So I think we are starting to think in those terms, but of course we need to do it a lot quicker. We need to think about what the implications of kind of different climate scenarios are on kind of the risk profile of a company or the employment profile of the company. It affects everything. So I just think we just need to be starting to think about that as a management discipline as well. Certainly companies are, I think the issue actually is that we have this permanent tension between companies looking to, largely kind of increase profits over the shorter term and then really sort of look for results in that shorter term. And many of the things in the investments that we're talking about here require such a long time frame that, again, I think the role of asset owners are really important as well, to be able to effectively really signal in a very strong sense that this is the expectation of the companies that they invest in, that this is all about kind of resilience and long-term success.
If I can add to this, because I happen to work in adaptation finance quite a lot.
Oh, there you go.
So,
you're the expert.
No, I agree with those points. But you really pointed to the need to change that return on investment understanding, because that's really what's holding back a lot of private capital going into adaptation. But more information and better information on the risks, the costs and benefits of those interventions is crucially important. We often don't have that, not quantified. So we need to do more on that front. There's other things, there's other reasons, and there's a long laundry list of why we're not seeing enough. But information here too plays a very important role. Other questions? There's two here up front.
Three in the...
Three.
The third row back's getting very excited. We've got three from the third row. I think the other row, you need to pick up your game.
Shall we start with the two in this row here? When you're done with your question, would you mind passing it on to the...
I'll keep it in the third row, yeah.
Three down, yes.
Thanks. Jane, you mentioned blended finance is something we need to figure out. I'm Lily Mara, by the way, from Terra Global Capital. We do nature-based solutions, and blended finance is very important to us. I was just wondering if you had any kind of further thoughts on ways that we might be able to leverage blended finance mechanisms more strategically or effectively, and what, if anything, might need to change in the financial system to make that happen.
I'm not the expert on this, so please don't feel that I'm giving a very good answer here. But what I do think is that actually, when you look at some of the COP negotiations, actually that provides a really excellent place to bring this debate right to the fore, because you've got all the right kind of component parts in place. And certainly in the previous COPs that I've had exposure to, it's been quite low down on the agenda. And I just think that we've got an opportunity to sort of bring that debate kind of up every single time. And I think as long as we've seen a little bit of it before, but I think it's a great environment to bring it, because you need all those actors in the same place, right? And And maybe the other thing is, I suppose, is examples of where it's worked really, really well.
I see a lot of work done lately by Rock, the cool capital stack. I don't know if you've looked into that as a sort of an approach into blended finance. That's a way to really think this through more effectively, because up until now, blended finance is a big term, but we don't really know exactly who comes in, how, when. We need to do a lot more work in this space, but Rock, they've done interesting work. I think we have time for one more question. Yes,
Thank
there
you.
you are.
Fiona Cladovista, the former regional ambassador for Latin America and Caribbean for COP26. I think it's been very encouraging both to hear from the panel and from your discussion, actually the progress that has been made in developing these various financial instruments and the associated standards, regulations, etc. But as you've all identified, also, we're running out of time. It's urgent. The situation's getting worse and the consequences are catastrophic for people and indeed, of course, for business and future economies. To make all this happen, not only needs more money generally, not only needs mitigation, adaptation. To make all this happen and the energy transition, you also need more mining. And it takes a long time to get more stuff out of the ground fast enough. So there's a real role here for finance to play in accelerating some of that, and also working with countries in Latin America in building some of those strategic partnerships where this region has many of the reserves that are very important to make this happen, but perhaps lacks the capacity to turn that into a reality and also to forge those partnerships for future economic and social development. So could you comment how the finance world can help with some of that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, I think it's often a misunderstood part, actually. I think it's easy for people to sort of say, oh, you just need to switch to clean energy. The truth is, there's, in my view, there's no kind of energy which is totally clean, right? I mean, we were talking about life cycle earlier. So I just think, number one, I think it's about kind of resetting expectations about what constitutes kind of clean or green. The other thing is around, I guess, really sort of thinking about what the locals' social and environmental impacts are of things like mining. There is work actually underway to set up a global commission on kind of mining, so that we make sure that in pursuit of a goal around decarbonisation, we are not unintentionally creating other problems, so that, and this is the thing, is I think there is a high risk of unintended consequences in some of the things that we do, unless we think as a system-wide, and that's why really thinking holistically around what we're doing, and actually understanding that in order to meet some environmental objectives, there is likely to be trade-offs, but we have to do those in a really sensitive way. I mean, all I can say is it requires financial markets, companies and governments to be really informed and open and honest about the fact that there is no silver bullet to this, because if there was, we'd have done it. And the fact that it would be a shame to kind of stop progressing because of the fear about kind of some of those consequences, some of those trade-offs. It requires a lot of political kind of bravery, I think, actually, and leadership bravery.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but please join me in thanking Jane Goodland for...
I'm biased, but this is going to be a good one, don't worry. We had a good chat. We talked for about nearly an hour, I think. So the challenge I've got is actually, can I chair it sufficiently enough to make sure that you make it out in time for the drinks and the networking. But I think, look, it's a fascinating subject on the carbon markets, and I'm also biased on that front because that falls in part of my remit at the stock exchange. So as was explained, I head sustainable finance in our capital markets and post-trade divisions at the exchange. We also have a big division with our data analytics business as well. But in capital markets, it's my team's responsibility for operating and developing our markets and the segments that support green finance, transition finance, and also the products and services that we have available for our clients and those listed on the London Stock Exchange. And we also have a big role convening the markets and the work that we do with many sort of industry and policy conversations. One of the big projects that we were involved in last year was around the voluntary carbon markets, and we launched a designation on the London Stock Exchange markets to support the listing of carbon funds that are investing in projects that are mitigating climate change and generating carbon credits for investors. So I feel slightly, there's my sort of, my interest in this panel is absolutely there. But we've got, an esteemed panel here of industry experts, and I'd like to introduce all of them and actually just allow you to share your perspectives on the carbon markets as well, because I think what's important is that when we talk about carbon markets, are we talking about the voluntary markets here, or are we talking about the compliance markets? And we already heard from other panels and from Julia, how important Latin America is in terms of the projects that are taking place and the volume of credits. I read an IETA report that said that 20% of the global carbon credits that are created come from Latin America. So I think we've got a lot to delve into and explore in the next 45 minutes. So could I just go through the panel? I'll start maybe with you, Eric, first of all, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and share sort of a little bit of insights into your views around the carbon markets at the moment. Sometimes what we always decided when we were talking about this is that we can go in lots of different directions. So let's just do the intro first.
Look, it's not perfect and nothing else made by humans, but it's gonna help. And it doesn't take care of adaptation financing, which is a big hurdle. But you got to put a price tag to this damn thing, otherwise this world's going to go up in smoke real soon. The UN calculates you need 20 gigatons the next 10 years to get to the 1.5 centigrades. If you calculate the carbon sink of the Amazon today, that requires 60 years of the Amazon and don't cut another tree. They've cut 17% of the trees in the last 10 years. If you cut another 20% of the Amazon, it starts emitting carbon. So how much does that cost? Well, Guyana just has $50 a ton for 10 years, $750 million. If you apply the same math, that's $16 billion a year that you have to pay the nine countries that control the Amazon. This is going to require a huge transfer of wealth from the OECD, the rich countries, quote unquote, to the poor countries, quote unquote. Whether you like it or not, I mean, you can disguise it however you want, but it is what it is. You guys screw up the world in the 19th century, and now you don't want us to screw our world, so pay me. It is what it is.
Simple as that. That's it.
Call it whatever you want, and that's more or less the price tag, and how you get there. Markets are like children. You got to spank them a little bit. Taxes, the Inflation Reduction Act, it really is. You get tax reductions if you do it, so it has to be taxed, and people have to realize that we have to change what we eat, how we cook it, how we dispose, how we drive it. It's going to be a more expensive, boring world than we had V8 engines and four-cylinder motorcycles, guys. It's just not going to be the same. It's just going to cost more, and you're going to pony up. How you deliver that message, I don't know. Information, Elena said, I'm not a politician, man. I just make bonds, okay? I just sell this stuff. I connect the money with the guys that need the money, and hopefully it will be greener money as we go along, because we actually need this stuff. But you need the OECD, the US, whatever, has to have, because laws are more, I'm not going to say intelligent. There's more of a tradition of following laws in certain countries than in others. So you tell Carrefour and Hess and Exxon what to do, and if you don't do, I'm going to tax you. So you need a carbon credit, so they come down to the Amazon and ask for, and it's market driven. You don't want Brussels putting all their fingers on all this, because we are screwed, right? And you need, taxonomy, I think is the name. Maybe the UN can become the new sheriff, since the UN is more or less losing its reason of raison d'etre. So maybe they get a new raison d'etre, and instead of having blue helmets, they have a green helmet. I don't know. Right?
Eric, we're going to have to come back to some of those points in a minute. I think. I'll see if Carlos can give a little bit of insight as well into what you think the current state of carbon markets is.
Sure thing.
Maybe in a short version.
Sure thing. It would be amazing to pick it up from where Eric has.
Yeah.
You have done an amazing job to hype the group, so thanks for that, mate. So I'm originally from Peru. I was listening on the previous sessions, and I think there's a common thread about technology and numbers. And I think that's great to center the discussion towards that. And link to your question originally, I think our view in Carbon Chain, we do carbon accounting. And even though that sounds relatively separated for any activity, it's pretty within all of our activities through LCAs or decision-making processes or transformational capex in any cases. I think we're positive because, as Elena rightly mentioned before, technology is an enabler of it. So if we can link that technology capabilities that we're developing with experiences that are regionally there, that will be absolutely a good pathway for making change.
Yeah. And Anna, your role at Trove Research, it gives you a great insight into the dynamics of the carbon markets, at the moment. Do you want to give some sort of sense of the voluntary compliance markets?
Yeah, that's exactly where I want to start. And just to explain a bit, in Trove Research, we are a data provider on the voluntary carbon market and corporate climate commitments. So I'm going to focus on providing an overall scope on the voluntary carbon market in Latin America. We look holistically at the market, so we look at what the projects look like in the region. We assess the integrity of those projects, which is an important topic at the moment. And in general, we look into what prices those projects are being traded for, also what corporates are doing, and what targets they're setting and how they're using carbon credits for that. We look at the policy environment and how that is affecting the market. And taking all that, we also forecast where the market is heading. So I would like to start to give a little bit of the numbers on what we see in the Latin American market. We see that there's more than 600 registered projects at the moment, and there's more than 350 which are in the pipeline and will be registered in the next years. This is divided in 23 countries, so there's a very strong presence of countries in the region in the voluntary carbon market. We estimate that more than $6.5 billion have been invested to develop these projects. And these projects have produced or have issued emissions reductions and removals of 400 million tons of emissions reductions or removals. That is 20%, as you said at the beginning. And to put this into context, Colombia's and Peru's 2020 emissions combined is 400 million tons. So that's what Latin American projects have issued up to now. And from those 450 million tons, half of it have already been bought by companies and used to offset their emissions. When we look, we know that Latin America's main advantage, or what we need to say that as we started, is the rainforest. So as we expect, the main projects in the region are nature-based. 75% of the projects are nature-based. The other 25% are mostly renewable energy. There's some other projects on clean cooking and non-CO2 gases to a lesser extent. And yeah, I'm going to put it out there. Lastly, it is impossible to talk about the state of carbon markets at the moment and not mention the scrutiny that they're facing right now.
Yeah. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm sure. There might be questions on
and
that.
It is not only for Latin America, but of course it impacts it heavily.
Yeah.
And we have a very important task to do on working on integrity on the market.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about the nature-based projects, and I think that's a great way to segue into to Liz to explain a little bit more about your role in focusing on natural climate projects at VP and what that means for you in terms of, sort of participation in the carbon markets.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. I apologize for using my phone. It's not that I'm texting anyone. It's just that at my age you start losing your memory, so I need these points. Yes, I'm Luz Ausaid. I'm originally Colombian, and I am leading the NCS origination at BP. I like to say that I have a sustainable development background, having worked with USAID programs for a very good part of my career. So the way I see carbon markets, and especially focusing on NCS in Latin America, is very much affected or influenced by it. I see a great potential for the region, although it's only 20% of the market at the moment, at least the voluntary market. I see there's huge potential, not only because the region has such an incredible key ecosystems that need to be protected and areas that need to be rehabilitated, but also because the region is in great need of mechanisms that really address the problems of the region, which usually have to do with lack of inclusion, with food security, with not including the local communities and the ancestral communities. So what I see is that since there is that big need for that mechanism, really, natural climate solutions and the carbon market really have a very good place in all of that, or in trying to solve some of that. Now, some countries have done a lot, and some countries have already implemented very good frameworks, and they have attracted investment more than others. However, it is very, very reassuring to see some countries that we didn't see before that are already starting to set up their own frameworks and starting to attract projects and attract investment. So I think that's very reassuring. Now, I think some other countries are starting to develop their own internal ETS or their internal carbon taxes, which is also really good. But I just would like to highlight that it doesn't mean that the voluntary market is not important. It continues to be incredibly important, because probably the demand for projects from those internal compliance markets would never be as big to generate the big impact that we really need in the, at least on the NCS or on the natural capital sector. So I just want to leave that with acknowledging the importance of the voluntary market for our countries.
Yeah, I think, we really have that view ourselves as well. In some ways, you think, is the voluntary just going to get dropped? Because actually it becomes more of a financing tool than those sort of considerations around actually how you're going to get to net zero. There has got to be an element of being able to offset as alongside a decarbonisation strategy. But you all mentioned, that Latin America is a leading provider of carbon credits and probably want to grow that as well. But you've got some challenges around integrity, of course, but you've also got some work that perhaps can be addressed by policy changes. So, Juana, I wanted to pose a question to you then around that, the balance of what can actually be done by policymakers, do you think, in the region to really get sort of that leadership position in terms of being a provider of long-term carbon credits?
We see that policymakers in the region are working very hard to provide legal frameworks for carbon markets. I would like to highlight 4 key trends that I'm seeing. The first one, as Luz mentioned, is compliance carbon pricing mechanisms. So policymakers in these countries are working on providing carbon taxes or making the institutional arrangement and legal arrangements to instaurate either carbon taxes or emissions trading systems. Colombia, Peru, Mexico have been leading on this. They all have a carbon tax in place. And they all have done their work on seeing how they connected to the voluntary carbon market and are taking carbon credits to offset part of the levy. We also see in Brazil, for example, the emissions trading system has become one of President Lula's main priorities. So we really see that that's moving on in the region. The second one is providing the legal frameworks for Article 6 transactions and how that will connect with the voluntary carbon market. It's going to be a turning point in the next years. We need to see how that develops in COP as well and Dubai. But Peru is the country that's done more, I would say, on Article 6 frameworks. Since 2021, they've been working on their legal framework for the National Registry and how that connects with Article 6 and what type of credits will be correspondingly adjusted. And there's also many countries that are working on the infrastructure for Article 6 transactions or their national registries. The third one is regulating the voluntary carbon market. And this is a tricky one because it is well intended. It is aimed to provide more integrity to the market, but it needs to be treated carefully as well, because if not well prepared and engage with stakeholders throughout the whole regulatory process, it can disincentivize investment and hinder the growth of the voluntary carbon market in the region. So here it is very important. Countries that are currently working on regulations are Colombia, Mexico just announced that they will be working on one. Peru, with their Article 6 framework, is also regulating the voluntary carbon market. Yeah. Paraguay also is discussing some things in the Congress right now. So this is an important issue, important topic to keep in mind, which is very important, as it is important that governments have an oversight to ensure the quality of the projects. Yeah. And that there are no double issuances and that projects do have permanence and are additional and so on. Mm. But that needs to be balanced also with the administrative and economic burdens that project developers will be facing. Yeah. And the fourth trend is more of a soft policy approach, which is fostering the national voluntary carbon markets. From what I've seen, I think Panama is the one that's taking this more seriously and that's trying to provide the rules around it. Just to wrap up, I would like to say that in Trove, we take a lot of time looking at countries' policies, and we have country profiles with very detailed information in which we also look at the opportunities and risks of the countries. And by looking at the 5 largest providers of carbon credits in Latin America, what we found is that these countries score moderately high in opportunities when compared to other countries in the region, but they score high on risk compared to other countries in the region. And this is mainly driven because due to climate policy uncertainty, which is all these regulations that they're working on and the uncertainty that brings on how they will develop. And some countries are not engaging stakeholders enough in the process. And others are land tenure, historic land tenure problems, and ongoing political unrest in some of these countries.
Yeah. Look, a lot of really valid points that you raised there, and and some of those actually think like regulation that is being looked at across the world as well. And I think there's a kind of a close eye that's being watched in all jurisdictions as to what's happening in the US, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in Latin America. It's all, we're all sort of learning in this space around the regulation side. But Carlos, I wanted to just move to you to ask you a question about carbon taxes. And we know that that's a popular instrument for emissions reductions in Latin America. And because a lot of the revenue that's being generated from those have some very positive social and economic and impacts. But do you think that some of the jurisdictions need to be a little bit more ambitious in that space? And are there perhaps some countries that have got some good precedents and that you can take some learnings from?
Good thing, Claire. And I will build on what Juan and Luz has shared with us. We are seeing first that due to the battery minerals corridor, that sort of Indonesia, Australia, going to Japan and so forth, it's making a huge change on what Asia Pacific is thinking of. Indonesia was mentioned before, and it's amazing what's happening there compared to what was only 6 or 12 months ago. So that's a great reflection on how supply chain could do to change a particular starting point as where nickel is processed. So I could say there's a huge progress in terms of what's going on in Asia Pacific. In terms of US, sure, IRA has changed everything and linked to that same supply chain. It's more day-to-day news on how investment has gone to a particular entity that it's in that supply chain. So I could say that that's something we won't be able to see a year ago or 2 years ago. So that's facts, and sure, regulation is part of that process. I could say in Latin America, the challenge and opportunity that we have is those hard-to-abate organizations are also physically there, as you rightly pointed out. So I think the incentives that they might have, particularly with their scope 3 challenges, it's huge. Imagine that you're going to your leader and you are asking about your scope 3 number, and you said, look, I'm halfly right in my number. It's unacceptable. And that's the situation that these organizations are having now. So that, unfortunately, will generate either a movement of them, one, be feeling more entitled to go deeply in their scope 3 calculations and how they will do it, and then what are the mechanisms to try to overcome that, being offsets or transitional plans, as we were discussing before. So I think on your original question on how we see the variance, it seems that the two regions, Asia Pacific and US, are also picking it up. That will represent huge opportunity for Latin America, no doubt about it.
Some good insights there, thank you. Look, we can't, we've talked a lot, about sort of, government actions here, and we can't just rely on government actions to address the climate crisis. We need to look at actually, the financing side as well. And Eric, I'd really like to ask you a question here about. Now, I'm going to ask you a very specific question here, I know, because I think the open-ended question is, how could finance play a role here, and how could they help to unlock some of the climate finance requirements in the region? But I know that you mentioned the OECD already, and maybe that's sort of the angle that you might want to think about that question.
Wow. Okay. There's a whole bunch of money out there looking what to do. Okay. Less so with high policies, higher rates in the U.S. Treasury. So why invest in Latin America when you can get 4.5% from the U.S. Treasury? Yeah. But there's still a whole bunch of money. This has to be done. Okay. If you get we talk about blended finance. Blended finance is fantastic, and it's the name of the game in Latin America today because rates were so high. All of a sudden, Washington is a darling of everybody, and so is Hermes, KfW, COFACI, and all those things because they got cheap money. Except they take 6 or 2 years to get anything done. So I think that's good for small projects or things where the ROE and ROA are just not there. But I think the market can take care of most of these things. Again, so you need regulations on the pension funds and investment managers in the developed countries that you have to have such a portfolio, and that's how we're going to create the necessity for bonds that are green or S or G or whatever. Money's never a problem. It never is. It's a question of price, and in this case, monitoring by, let's say, a UN, or get the taxonomy right, so this alphabet soup of things even I can get straightened out, so you can price it. If you define the problem, the investor defines the price. But if you don't keep it vague, well, then you can't define the price. So no, financing is not a problem. We might create the OPEC of the Amazon. That'd be an interesting idea. To have muscle power when we negotiate our carbon credits. But we talk about America, you're missing the elephant in the China shop, which is that China produces half of the 7 largest producers of carbon dioxide. China produces half of it. So everything we're talking here is just in America and our own niche of the world. And the other one that's difficult to measure is away from America is India, which is the 3rd largest producer. And are they EM or are they developed? And how are you going to play that? I mean, are we going to produce more rice and cut more trees? How the heck? Anyway, back to Latin America, money's not a problem. Just make it clear. But you need to put a stick in the behind of the company to go and get the carbon credits. It is, it's going to cost money. And that's going to go to the consumer in the US, in Holland, in whatever, and eventually around the world. It just costs money. But I don't think blended finance is going to be the solution for that. It just takes too much money. And last note, to be hopeful. This all started in 1997 with Kyoto, where a small little country called the United States didn't sign. And, they said we're grumpy about it because of the oil sector. And then you go back to Norway, or was it Norway or Denmark, dumped all the divestiture of US oil company shares, which is neat. Then get to 2012 in Doha. And then that gets you to Paris 2015. That's a really good one. And then we have the little thing called COVID, that sort of, and before that we had 2008 sort of where the financial systems were working for 4 days in the mid-October 2008. We have no banking worldwide. And then you had COVID, and then you have Glasgow in 2001. So there's a hell of a lot that needs to be done quickly, but a lot has happened in the last few years. Why? I don't know. I guess investors, mom and pop, everybody wants to go green. There's a lot of BS, there's a lot of greenwashing, but where there's so much smoke, there is some fire, and slowly we're getting there. But you need to, put the whip to the companies via taxes to behave correctly. Nobody behaves correctly because you're good. I mean, voluntary tax credits are yay much, and cap credits are yay much, because either you do that or I'll tax you. So take them from that. But people react, and the market can react. It can't just be the Amazon. Amazon only cleans about 24% of the emissions in, let's say, 30% of emissions in the world. So my example of 6 years of the Amazon, more has to be done, but that would be a good place to start.
That was hopeful. There was a hopeful point in there. There is money there for projects. But I think sort of picking up on something that we were talking about with projects and the sort of integrity point. Maybe something I could put to you, Carlos, and to you, Luz, around the REDD+ projects. Takes a deep breath. I mean, there's a strong presence of those in Latin America, so we need to make sure that we do talk about them more than any other region. And they can be complex, they can face a lot of scrutiny, but it is really important that we unlock that full potential of those projects, get the strategies right, and how do you think we ought to be tackling those and to make sure that actually that you address some of those challenges that category of project is facing at the moment?
Yeah. So I'm so happy you asked me that question because I am a great believer in REDD+. Definitely not by discarding it. I really think that when well designed, REDD+ and implemented well, REDD+ is the most effective mechanism you will find out there. It is the mechanism that can actually reverse the perverse incentives and provide not only a route to conservation, but also sustainable livelihoods for the forest-dependent people. Of course, it needs to be done well. It's one of the only mechanisms I have seen in the world that recognizes the incredible role and the huge role of local communities on the fight against climate change. The only one.
Yeah.
And I really wish the critics looked at the excellent and life-changing benefits of REDD in many projects around the world, not only on people, but also on biodiversity, and focused on having a constructive conversation about improving it, and not just killing it for the sake of it. Because it's taken a long time to get where we are. And the projects that were developed 10 years ago, 13 years ago, they all took a big, big risk on starting. And thanks to them, we have developed a lot of the science that allows us to be here. So I would really like to acknowledge that for those projects and those people that have worked on these projects for a long time. We, from BP, we acknowledge the importance of improving the standard, the importance of doing things well. And we support the work of the ICBCM and the CCPs, and all the work that is being done in integrity. We really support it. And actually, we have internally invested a lot of resources on building a very strong technical team so that we can make our own judgment whether technically a project is strong, is robust, and is good enough for us to invest in it. Our technical team not only helps us during the investment period, but also we have project management, project management throughout the life of the projects, because projects change, the reality strikes, and life changes. And you need to be in a constant supervision and a constant monitoring that the project actually happens well. So all of this to say, and the other thing actually is that we believe that investing in early stages, in early stage opportunities is very important, because then you get to know your project developer, you get to know the project much better, and to build that partnership, really, that long-term partnership, so you can build together an excellent project.
You feel passionate about it, yes.
No,
Sure.
Can you tell?
Exactly. Paulus, do you agree, or have you got a kind of a different view?
I agree with what Luz mentioned. I will only add that for any connected to land person, free prior informed consent, it's a basic. Working before in mining, I could say the only cases where there were long-term options for that project to be converted in an operation and generating value was when FPIC was there. So I agree with Luz. I could say we need to go to the next level, that process needs to be done with radical transparency and radical collaboration. If not, there will be only a subset solution, not a system solution for that particular country or region.
I'm very conscious of time, and I have got lots more questions here, but I'm sure you've probably got questions as well. But I would like to just ask one more of mine, first of all. Maybe then I'll pause and see if there are questions from the audience. We've spoken a lot about nature-based projects, and I think it's just only right that we actually also focus on the fact that there is substantial carbon capture opportunities as well in Latin America. And so, Juana, I'd like to ask you a little bit more, if you could elaborate on what some of those incentives are in place that are going to promote the adoption of those sorts of projects as well.
Yeah, so definitely in Latin America, there's way more opportunities than just looking at the conservation of rainforests, without saying that this is not very important, and that I also think that there's a lot that's being done to improve REDD+ methodologies, and that there are many good projects in the region, such as there are others that are doing poorly. But to get back on the topic on carbon capture and storage, I think that's one of the project types where we see big opportunities in Latin America. Carbon capture and storage looked at the broader type. It includes reductions and removals. Removals are, for example, direct air capture, marine air capture, and then reductions are related to the industrial process and capturing those emissions and storing them and in the process, and therefore reducing the emissions of that whole process. That is a technology that is, or those project types are still seen in small quantities because they're very costly. The technology is very costly, and that's why it needs incentives to be deployed more widely and to be used. The US has taken the lead on that. I think we've heard now many times the Inflation Reduction Act, where they included important subsidies for the industry. Some other examples in the US is the bipartisan infrastructure law, and they also have now regional air capture hubs. So we can see that it's supported by, it's a bi-party support, and also there's regional support, and it's also part of Biden's main policy. So the US, it wants to take the lead on carbon capture and storage. And then the EU, we will know their position and their framework in the next couple of months. They're working in 2 important regulations, which are currently being discussed within the EU governing bodies. So yes, there are important incentives right now. This is a technology which is particularly popular within the oil and gas industry. Yes. I'm sure Luz will talk some more about this because they have the experience with similar technologies and because it is useful to decarbonize some of their processes. I would like just to finalize saying that carbon removals in general are having a very big momentum, and that I would also like to call on policymakers, on investors here, and on corporates to look at other carbon removals, such as biochar, or also nature-based removals, such as blue carbon, which we have extensive mangroves in Latin America. And mangroves can store more carbon per hectare, can produce also the biodiversity benefits. So yeah, I just wanted also to point that out.
Yeah, no, good call to action. Yeah. And I promised to pause my questions and see if there's any from the audience. So please do raise your hand if you have any.
Thank you so much. I wasn't sure if I can, as part of the speakers, but I have a question for the colleagues. As you may know, a few weeks ago in Ecuador, the citizens voted in favor of the protecting Yasuní, which is this natural reserve, instead of exploiting from fossil fuels. And one of the critical elements for the government is, okay, we are not going to receive that income from fossil fuels, and how we are going to raise money, not only to protect it, but also to feed the economy. So I'd like to know what, in your point of view, could be a good alternative for the government to keep like raising money, not exploiting fossil fuels, but like, I don't know if a carbon market can fit here. But I think it's a trend that we would like to see more in the region because, as you said, it's a massive reserve of forest. However, we know that a lot of actors don't see this as a good trend. So I would like to hear your thoughts and potential options for the economy that will go hopefully this way. Thank you.
If I may.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It is a very tricky question because Ecuador has a constitutional restriction to benefit from environmental assets. So carbon markets in Ecuador are very constrained on what they can be used for. They have been working very hardly to find ways, such as I mentioned Panama, on the soft policies of creating a national voluntary carbon market. They have their own program also on their national voluntary carbon market, where they've done a lot of things to try to come around that constitutional restriction and be able to also include nature projects within that national voluntary market. It is quite complicated at the moment still. There was also a proposal to amend the environmental code so that it was clear that carbon markets and the international voluntary carbon market could be used for other project types that weren't nature-based. Mm-hmm. Because right now, the regulation is not even clear, so the uncertainties are restraining any type of investment in voluntary carbon markets. Unfortunately, when that law was going to be discussed, well, we know what happened with the Congress, and so that is paused for the moment. So yeah, it would be very interesting to see how the carbon market can be used more, but they have a hard way to go and a long way.
Can I add something there?
Yeah.
Ecuador has traditionally been one of those countries that has very much tied forest carbon to sovereignty, sort of. So it's like we can trade any other type of carbon eventually, but forest, it's a sovereign issue. I think they have explored, they have played with the Yasuni, for example, is one example that I lived through one of those efforts a few years ago of maybe protecting the Yasuni via carbon markets, but it didn't go through. It never worked because precisely of this issue. I think if the legislation happens to change, and I know there's a lot of push for it, then carbon would definitely be the best option. The other thing potentially could be payment for ecosystem services or payment for performance, which is what I think many other countries like Bolivia, exactly, have done. But it's small, exactly, and it's dependent on many things. So I think carbon markets would be the best.
Yeah, just to add, I forgot to say that they also voted on a referendum in the past months to change the constitution, no restriction on being able to profit from environmental assets, and it didn't pass. So
I've got the red flag. Does that mean no more questions? Is it? Maybe. Do we have one question that's standing between us and some drinks? So
I'll be quick
Yeah,
because
be quick,
people won't like me. Halil Bedevi from Santander. I'm the head of advanced manufacturing sectors. Question is, will climate change problem finally bring the world together and help level up, because you can't contain the climate change in one place. It's global. You can't be okay in my country, be rich and have everything, whatever. But how do we, countries are competitive, politics, ideologies, they want to keep their differentiators, wealth, technology, others want to catch up. What's the answer now? How is that going to be achieved? And also, we talk about
another 3 hours.
we're talking about financing things, but sometimes people forget financial institutions they need to be around to help, and they need to be sustainable in themselves. So, backing wrong technologies, wrong projects and things is a risk. We've got a lot of issues to deal with here. Sorry.
Big question.
And I have faith in technology as an engineer myself. I think technology help to create some of these problems, pollution, whatever. Will it now come to a rescue? I have faith in technology. It now needs to help to clean it up.
Big question.
You're the
Carlos,
technology
do you want
person.
Carlos,
Elena answers. She's a technology person. I'm not answering anything.
Carlos, did you want to
I think it's a great reflection.
We all have a few more hours.
I'll talk to Erica.
Dude, if you're gonna, you're gonna have the deep bed here, bro. Come on. They used to say the U.S. Army, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, okay? The carbon credits are simple and stupid, but they work. And you price it, not Brussels, not the UN, a buyer and a seller. And us banks trying to put the buyer and the seller together, and we get paid for that. But because you got to make it market driven. You can't subsidize stuff, because the moment you start subsidizing stuff, something else goes wrong somewhere else. So it's got to cost, it will cost, tax it, drive the companies to search for carbon credits, create the OPIC of Amazon for all I care, and negotiate with them as a block. It sort of worked for the Arabs for a while. I don't know. But what I'm trying to answer is, if you make it a tax, if you make it a cost, make it an obligation on in countries where more or less laws are developed, it sort of filters down to the rest of the world, and that takes care of. So you tax it, you make it profitable for us to sell the credits out of the Amazon or the Peruvian or Yasuni, whatever, and everybody's happy, and we hate it, but we're getting cleaner because it's going to cost. And then you deal with China. Man, I don't know about China, so maybe they'll behave, maybe not, because maybe China will start creating less pollution, just like the Russians did. The Russians didn't meet their 2015 guidelines because they were good, no pun intended, people, but because their economy was going into a recession, which, of course, even further now. And maybe the Chinese will start meeting their requirements easier because they went from a population pyramid like this to like this. So I don't know, but go deal with Xi Jinping and ask him. I don't know, what he has in mind. But from our side, tax it, make it simple, and the market will give you an answer. I'm not trying to be a libertarian here, and the money is there. Okay, it's not. And yes, Red Plus, I think, is the best. It's the simplest and best. And we got Google Map and all kinds of stuff. You can monitor and police this stuff. It's not that difficult. Okay, it's not like 30 years ago. Now you can see that they're burning 1 Belgium per annum in the Amazon. It's very simple to see it and police it. And Brazil's going to ask you to check if you want me to burn the 1 Belgium.
The short answer is to be continued. I think, I think, look, I said that it was going to be a good one. Hopefully, you agree. There's, a lot that we can continue to debate here. And so I'd really like to say thank you to all of my panelists. To Jeremy to close.
Look, I'm going to do a few closing remarks. I'm not going to try and sum up the last 2 hours, or certainly not the last 2 minutes, but it was thank you. It's fantastic. And, a lot of time and effort goes into putting these conferences together and trying to get the right blend of speakers and trying to get people insightful and informative and come at problems from different angles. So thank you to, I don't know about carbon pricing, but we've got a very good panelist pricing scheme because none of them were paid anything by Canning House, and yet they were all excellent. And that's got to be a winning formula for us. So thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to Jane and Harold for the fireside chat. Should have called it the heat pump chat. But I can recycle that joke for our renewable energy conference next month. But that was great as well. So thank you, Harold, for conducting that. I want to thank LSEG. I was specifically asked to thank Perla, Johanna, and Rob, but I want to thank them more generally because this is a big, substantial subject matter, and it will be discussed in detail for decades to come. And this is a big, substantial institution with a global reputation, so it's a perfect host for us to be tackling this issue for the last couple of hours, and they've been great partners for us for this event. So thank you to all of them on an individual level and an institutional level. Finally, Canning House itself. We organise, as I said at the beginning, a number of these sort of commercial business orientated conferences, but we're also in other areas. For example, we've got a big event coming up imminently on the forthcoming Argentinian presidential election. So we're trying to explore all different aspects of Latin America in a hard-headed, sort of serious, informative way. We feel that Latin America deserves more attention than it typically gets in Britain, and for that matter in other countries as well. And it's our mission to rectify that deficit and to try and shine a light on Latin America and bring its many virtues and opportunities to a wider audience. So we tried to do that today, and we'll carry on doing that on a daily basis, but we love to have your support. If you follow us on social media or something as passive and non-time consuming as that, thank you, spread the word. But for the corporates out there, if you want to become corporate members of ours, join us, sponsor us, be partners of us in events, that's greatly appreciated, because obviously we need that type of participation and support to carry on doing what we're doing and to grow what we're doing and reach even wider audiences. And we've got a team, and all of this takes time, all the badges you're wearing, all the graphics and everything. People have worked on putting that together. I'm not going to name everybody, but Wan and Clory take the lead on our sort of corporate engagement. They took the lead on putting this event together. Thank you for both of them. They're very professional and they're doing a great job. And finally, please stay for drinks. We often find that, when we get the feedback forms, one of the bits that people most enjoy standing around drinking at the end. So who'd have thought it, hey? But so please don't rush out. It's a Friday evening. If not now, then when? Please stay for an hour or so and join us next door. Bye-bye.